All right, today we have got the goods for you. We have got a 2024 books you must read. I'm John Henderson with the Conservative Book Society, reviewing and recommending books from a conservative perspective. Let's get to it. All right, I've broken this list down into three sections. The first are the books that I want to read this year that I have not had an opportunity to read. Then we've got a list of books that I read last year that I think from 2023 that we think are just excellent reads that you should put on your reading list for this year. And then I'm going to wrap it up with some classics that everyone must read. All right, first, we're going to review the books that I wanted to read last year, I just didn't get to. So they were my reading list first up this year. A guy by the name of Richard Acorn has written two books about Abraham Lincoln. The first one is called Every Drop of Blood, the momentous second inauguration of Abraham Lincoln. And that one came out several years ago. I've really been wanting to read that book. But then he also last year published another book called The Lincoln Miracle, the Republican Convention that changed history. And I really want to read both of those books back to back. They are on my list. Next up is The Two-Parent Privilege by Melissa Kearney. And she wrote this book. There's an obvious advantage to having two parents. The marriage rates have been on the decline and people have been having fewer children. And there have been lots and lots of divorces and split-ups and all these sorts of things. She wrote a book analyzing the data. What happens when you grow up in a two-parent household? What happens to children? What happens to the success of the adults? And so forth. So I really want to read that book to try to learn what from a data standpoint, scientific standpoint, but also from a cultural shift standpoint, what we can do to try to encourage the nuclear family, the two-parent household family, to try to help the next generation of people. And last in this section, Richard Norton Smith wrote a book called An Ordinary Man about President Ford. And Ford kind of gets lost in the mix a lot of times because Nixon was such a intriguing and flawed character. And then Ford is followed by Carter, and Carter's presidency was just an absolute disaster, a wreck. And then there is the Reagan presidency, and he comes in and he just does all this fantastic stuff, and he is really just a big monumentous figure. And so Ford kind of gets lost in there, but what he did to add stability and bring stability back to the country was fantastic. I've always wanted to learn more about his presidency. And then I've got three books that I read last year that I encourage anybody to read. They came out last year. The first one is Outlive by Peter Attia, and this book addresses a lot of health and fitness issues that a lot of people are familiar with. How to eat right, how to exercise, all these sorts of things. We know these concepts, but seeing the data somehow has an ability to change your mindset and get you really focused on things. So I encourage everybody to read that book. It's sort of an anti-aging edge to it, but it's also about current health and fitness and what we can do to live long and healthy lives. Another book I read that came out last year was Proclaim Liberty Throughout All the Land by Mark David Hall. I've got a review of this book as well on my website and also on the YouTube channel. And this book is an excellent read for anybody seeking to try to understand what has been the Christian impact on our nation from the very beginning. It's a fantastic read. I encourage everyone to read that one as well. And then rounding out this list is Senator Tim Scott wrote a book. I know it's a book sort of announcing his presidency and all this, but it's called America, A Redemption Story. And of all the books I read books by most of the Republican candidates in this past year in 2023. And of all of them, this one was speaking to me absolutely the most because Tim Scott is super sincere, and I think that we're living in an age of sincerity. It's one of the reasons why Donald Trump has been so successful in politics and business is because he just says what's on his mind. Tim Scott does the same sort of thing here. It's not scripted. It's not written from an aide. Senator Scott happens to be my United States Senator, and so I've had an opportunity to get to vote for him a number of times, and I've really liked him, and he has grown and progressed through the years. This book is hands down better than the first book that he wrote with Trey Gowdy a number of years back, which I found to be a good book as well. But Tim Scott does an excellent job telling us his story, and it's really the quintessential American story. And it's inspiring, I think, for most people to read and to help understand who he is. Now, I got some classics on my list as well. The first one is When Character Was King, written by Peggy Noonan. I've recently done a review of this book, a more in-depth YouTube review, and also on my website. But When Character Was King is a book about Ronald Reagan, and his superpower was that he had great character, and he maintained that throughout his entire life. I had an add it to kind of a classics level. Read it. It's awesome. And then Ernest Hemingway. Everybody needs to read periodically, needs to read some good fiction. I mean, it really, in a interesting way, fiction has the ability to tell the truth about things in a way that the real story doesn't. And I know that doesn't make a ton of sense, but it does when you read Hemingway's books. He really gets at the heart of human nature in a way that few other authors have. He also, just his prose are fantastic. His stories grip you in. The writing style is so good that it's hard to put down when you read these books. My two favorite of all the Hemingway books, outside of his short stories. Now, I can do a whole nother segment on his short stories, but For Whom the Bell Tolls is just excellent. And then also The Old Man and the Sea. Everybody read it as a kid. But you know that book is really written for adults, and it's interesting because it's somehow is reflecting on his life. I think it's a book that people, the older you get, the more meaning you can get out of that book. And no classics list would be complete without Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. There are a lot of C.S. Lewis books out there, but Mere Christianity is one that I think everybody needs to read because he makes the case for the Christian faith probably as well or better than almost anybody else, and his writing style is so good that it's hard to put down. And rounding out my list of books that we have got to read, everyone should read in 2024, is 1776 by David McCullough. This book really sets the stage for the United States, why we exist as a country, what we were fighting for in the first place. It's interesting to think about those principles that the men and women in 1775, 1776, in the early days of our country, what they were fighting for in the spirit, and think about where we are today and whether or not that spirit, that flame of liberty is still alive in the United States today. This book will inspire you to want to learn more and understand more about who we are as Americans and what our country is all about. You can find links to all of those books on my website. It's conservativebooksociety.com. Also links through the YouTube channel and our Instagram page and various other ways. We would really appreciate it if you bought through our links because that helps our channel and our website grow so that we can produce more and more content like this. I'm John Henderson with the Conservative Book Society. Happy reading in 2024.